helps draft Ireland's independence constitution. Like, the guy's kind of a superstar. Ultimately, he returns to his hometown to attempt the impossible, Puerto Rican independence. But soon, Campos would find himself bouncing in and out of prison for 25 years.
Cuando los adultos de la patria tienen que salir despavoridos de sus lares, no tienen siquiera salida a países extranjeros distintos del poder enemigo que nos oculta. Tienen que ir
thanks
a
to the
Estados
American
Unidos
government
de los esclavos, de los poderes
and their
económicos,
sheep,
de los tiranos.
the subordinate sheep.
Things haven't quite escalated. This movement is just starting. Campos comes back to Puerto Rico with the goal of total separation from the United States, and people join him. A lot of people, just everyday, ordinary Puerto Ricans who are fed up with being exploited. They join them, they organize, and they call themselves the Nationalists. They run for office, they go on strike, and they fight back against this superpower that has been exploiting them. Momentum begins to pick up. And then the dominoes really start to fall. There was this American doctor. His name is Cornelius Rhodes, and he went to Puerto Rico saying he's going to do like health research or something. We know what he really was doing.
It's like they always do. They go abroad and start fucking poisoning people and call it fucking experiments.
Beyond doubt, the dirtiest, laziest, and most
And there to
degenerate
help.
and thievish race
Just
of
like they're
men
doing in
ever
Africa,
to have
Jamaica.
inhabited this sphere. And he goes on to say that it makes him sick to, quote, inhabit the same island with them. But he doesn't stop there. He says that Puerto Ricans need, quote, something to totally exterminate the entire population. And then he admits to a crime. He says, I have done my best to further the process of their extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. I mean, this is bad. It's really bad. But for a lot of Puerto Ricans, this wasn't surprising. So the staff at the hospital find this letter and they send it around to everyone. And it goes out and it goes viral. And nothing happens to this guy who has...
Of course not. Why would anything happen to
Puerto
him?
Ricans. Actually, something does happen. He gets on the front cover of Time magazine. To the Nationalists, this letter confirms something that they already knew. It actually wasn't that surprising. There was an awareness that, yes, America loves Puerto Rico for their soil and their labor and their strategic location, but hates them as people. So after this letter, the movement explodes. It gets to the point where the US and their puppet government on the island can no longer ignore this movement. Soon, a bunch of new officers are hired and trained and armed with machine guns and tear gas. But the Nationalists keep fighting. Then, in 1935, police kill 4 Nationalists at a university event. The Nationalists retaliate by killing the police chief. Then, without trial, the police execute his killer and arrest Campos, the leader of the movement, for plotting to overthrow the government. Campos is given this rigged trial with a jury made up mostly of mainland Americans, and he gets sentenced to prison for 10 years.
Made
A few
up of
months later,
squatters, he
people are
means.
out peacefully protesting on Palm Sunday, and the police start shooting into the crowd. Men, women, children, and elders are all clubbed and beaten to death and shot in the back as they run away.
Legally.
19 are killed, and over 100 are wounded, but it still doesn't put down the movement. The violence only pours fuel on the fire. Back in Washington, D.C., they're starting to get worried that this independence movement is just going to keep building. And they don't want to give up their island in the Caribbean. There's still plenty of money to be made off of Puerto Rican soil and labor, not to mention the military bases that they had there. So they turn to an extreme measure, something that, as I learned about and as we reported on, has been blowing my mind in a way that I study this stuff a lot. I look at the behavior of empires. I look at how they control people. I've never seen this before.
We stop with the self-care week. Like, what if we did adult? All of the that we just put away.
It starts with FBI agents who come to the island to work with the police of Puerto Rico. They have one simple mission: to spy on anyone who they deem politically subversive and to sabotage them, and thus sabotage the independence movement. So they spy on everyone.
That's your
They spy
favorite
on
word.
the Nationalists who are part of the movement,
Subversive.
but also their friends, their partners,
Fucking
their
sheep.
sexual partners, their business colleagues, their children. They track down criminal records and mistresses and debtors and creditors and photos and license plate numbers, school transcripts, and even the guest list to weddings. Like, they got really really detailed. They started listening in on phone calls and intercepting letters. Everything was fair game. The idea was to create panopticon, this idea that they're always watching. They also started to cultivate relationships with a network of informers. Often the victim's family or friends or neighbors would get sucked into this state spying apparatus. The FBI uses payments and coercion and manipulation, which often forces people to turn on each other, causing divorce and broken friendship and fractured communities. Much of this was done undercover. Like these FBI agents would just be dressed in normal clothes, but would be constantly surveilling the people around them. Oh, and we know about this because they documented everything. If you were a person of interest, you probably had a file. All of these files, they're called the carpetas. Our story producer, Rafaela, went to San Juan to see the carpetas firsthand.
So I'm at the General Archive building in San Juan in Puerto Rico to see these secret surveillance documents that were collected on thousands of Puerto Ricans over so many decades.
After weeks of work, I finally got to look at Las Carpetas to see what was actually in these files. And it's kind of creepy, I have to say. You see specific times and dates and details from meetups, detailed descriptions of the locations where people are just meeting, all of the names of people involved, these subgroups that were potentially supporters of the independence movement. You get these highly detailed physical descriptions of the people that they were tracking, their occupation, the model of their car, their license plate number, and all of their moves, all of their activities, what they were doing, who they were supporting. And even for those who moved away from Puerto Rico, they continued to track them, knowing exactly what apartment they lived in the Bronx. They speculated about their nationalistic tendencies. And then you see these interviews that agents were having with people close to the target, where their personal beliefs are revealed, like one who thought that Puerto Rico would be repaired with socialism and independence. You can see a source telling these agents that they're afraid that their friend had become friends with the leaders of the independence movement and had been inducted in because of this friendship. And of course, these informants request that all this information they're spilling to the agents, quote, be kept secret. These agents would even interview family members. Like there's this whole transcript of the agents talking to the mother of someone who was suspected to be a part of the independence movement. Oh yeah, and in all of these documents, you see an obsession with who had guns. It's hard to overstate how exhaustive this spying effort was and how powerful it was. The FBI was able to use all of this information to intimidate and blackmail and punish suspected nationalists. I mean, there are thousands of these examples, from children being like kidnapped and put into a helicopter by the FBI to people being denied government jobs, all because they had a carpeta. At the end of the day, it was psychological war against Puerto Ricans who wanted independence, and it worked horrifically well in dividing these people and making them feel powerless.
Yeah, money does wonders.
In their most personal of moments.
Death notes.
Oh, and it wasn't just a couple of years. This lasted for decades. Eventually it gets to the point
And it's
where
still fucking
Congress
happening
and
today.
nationalists see no other way other than armed revolution. In the fall of 1950, the nationalists declare Puerto Rico as an independent nation. They attempt to seize towns, to set government buildings on fire, to cut phone lines. They try to assassinate the governor. And let's be honest, it's 1950. Like, the United States is easily the most powerful country to have ever existed. These people had no chance of winning against the newly crowned global superpower. Their goal was to bring attention to the world, to pressure the US to give up its colony. But instead, the United States responded by dropping bombs. The only time in the history of the United States where they bombed their own citizens.
That's what they're fucking
One
good at.
survivor of the revolution was interviewed 5 years
Dropping
ago
fucking
and
bombs.
said that it was a David against Goliath situation, and that their leader told them that they might die, but that they might succeed, but that at least they would have let the world know about Puerto Rico. During this revolution, many of the fighters wore their Sunday best, ironed suits and pressed ties, because they knew they would die. They had a cause they were fighting for. In the end, 24 are killed. Puerto Rico really didn't have a chance. President Truman comes out and is sort of like, there was an incident in Puerto Rico, sort of downplays it. And a couple days later, 2 nationalists attempt to assassinate him. The world doesn't come to Puerto Rico's rescue, and instead, the police carry out a mass arrest, throwing 3,000 people in jail. A few years later, 4 nationalists opened fire in the chamber of the US Congress. Campos is arrested again, and this time he's sentenced to 80 years in prison. There's evidence that during this time in prison, Campos was exposed to extreme levels of radiation. The consequences allegedly gave him a stroke and left him paralyzed and unable to speak. And in the end, the US's wish came true. They silenced Campos for good.
Yeah, they fucking killed him legally.
Hey, Ben Stiller here.
Using the system
As
they
temperatures
created
drop,
to control the
millions of
masses.
Refugees and displaced people
Typical
are once again
fucking
facing brutal, freezing.
squatting empire.
After the squashing of the revolution, the surveillance program continued for decades. In the end, it was a total of 50 years of state-sanctioned spying on the people of Puerto Rico. When it all came to light, they estimated that around 100,000 people had files. A lot of people in Puerto Rico knew that this was happening, but they just knew it in their gut. They didn't have any real evidence of it. They didn't realize the sheer scale, the methodical approach that the FBI was taking to spy on them and to divide them and to psychologically debase them. In total, it was 1.8 million pages of documentation. And many of the victims of this spying are still alive today. I think the carpetas are a really powerful signal of how the US kept its colony in the Caribbean. They were the cementing of what the US had done from the beginning, which is create a system of reliance and oppression where people lived and died under the thumb of this massive superpower that was exerting very, very
and they're still doing it today
over these people. These people who were
they call
American
themselves
citizens.
fucking humans.
It's hard to fully
Patriotic
understand
humans.
and impossible to relate
It's
to
pathetic.
the psychological impact that this program would have on the people that it
No
affected,
fucking
but also the
dignity, no fucking
generations
self-respect.
who came from the people who it affected. Imagine such a pervasive force that was sowing division, mistrust, betrayal, and fear, not just of the government, but of each other. Puerto Rico never got independence. And to this day, they remain an unincorporated territory, which means that they don't have the same rights as other American citizens. And the status of the island is a heated debate. Many Puerto Ricans value the modern day benefits of being connected to the US, but at what cost? This is backlit by the US's lasting control over the island. And even though the people of Puerto Rico served in our armed forces, they
Let's
still can't
compare
vote
and
for the president.
contrast.
They still don't have full representation.
Let's look
in
at
our
the
democracy.
Jews.
And yet, Puerto
those
Rico
pretentious
still
Jews.
has this immense impact on American culture and life. The food, the music, the dance, the art from this island, it's a part of what it means to be American. And yet, I think most of us don't really think about the status of this place very often, or its history. It's only when there's like a hurricane on this island, and we see the US kind of barely show up relative to how they show up for
Yeah,
their
they
other
show up and
citizens.
throw fucking
Only
paper
then
towels.
are we reminded that
Here,
Puerto
fix
Rico
your country
is
with paper
a
towels.
colonial possession,
Fucking
one taken
scumbags.
in war and exploited through predatory and racist policies, and then held on to through a massive amount of state force, spying, violence, and repression. And what we're left with is yet another example of a place whose vibrant spirit and culture and people are somehow able to shine through the dark fog of colonial abuse that has left deep wounds on this island.
Yeah, that says a lot how fucking strong we are. That's why they fucking treat us the way they treat us. Cause they know. They fucking know. That's why I'm labeled subversive. Fucking my